knowledge session on understanding kids viewership trends on TV, and I would like to welcome Aaditya Pathak, EVP Client Partnership and Revenue Function, BARC India. Aditya ji, over to you, sir.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, Aditya ji, you are. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Aaditya Pathak and I'm from BARC India. And I'm here to present the understanding of kids viewership and the trends of the 2 to 14-year-olds in terms of what they view on television. Can I have the next slide, please? What we intend covering here is the overall TV landscape of kids. We will obviously look at what kids do watch on their platform as much as they would want to probably watch stuff which would be only dedicated to their genre. There is a segment that we cover on the overall advertising volume on the kids space and how that is structured as against the overall total TV volume. We'll have a flavor of what's happened during the entire COVID period, right from pre-COVID, that is the pre-first wave in 2020, and how it's panned out over this 1 year period. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in order to understand, the 2 to 14-year-old viewing pattern, I think it's absolutely essential first to have an audience size in our mind. We have approximately 210 million TV owning households in India. This is as per the Universe Update 2020 that BARC had done, of which we have now 892 million odd individuals in those TV owning households. And 230 of those individuals are kids aged 2 to 14, which clearly goes to give us an understanding that 26% is what the overall TV audiences today are in the households that own TV, and that's a sizable component. Next slide, please. Even if we were to break down between the last universe estimate that we had done, which was BI 2018 until the UE update on 2020, 2 to 14 very clearly, which is the first quadrant that you would see, has been growing at a rapid pace, which is pretty much in line with what the population and the entire geography of this country would be. And it's the highest component in terms of the age groups that we have, which are present on TV today. Next slide, please. It's very important for us to gauge various contours of this 2 to 14. We figured out the audience size being 26%, which was the 230 million of the 892 of the TV owning households. What is it that this 26% kids population actually contributes on total TV's viewing, which is 21%, which is the second quadrant from there. The same 2 to 14, which contributes 21% on overall TV, how much is that kids dedicated genre now contributing to the total TV percentage, which is 7% today? The ad volumes that it attracts, slightly under indexed, stand at 3%. Next slide, please. Often there are questions that are asked within the ecosystem. Are kids really watching the kids genre? How much time do they really spend on that? What is it that they spend otherwise on TV? It's important to note, and a very key consideration to factor, that approximately 27 billion viewing minutes on a weekly basis is what these 2 to 14-year-olds today spend collectively on the kids genre. On an average, 80 million kids today would be watching the kids channels per week and spending an hour and 23 minutes daily on these kids channels. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the kids channels, when we talk about all these percentages, just to give you a context, today within the BARC ecosystem, there are approximately 580 odd channels that are being monitored and measured in BARC. These are approximate numbers, they keep changing month on month, of which 24 such channels are dedicated kids channels. We have 15 of these which are virtual channels. By virtual, we mean these are multi-language channels. And then there are 9 which are specifically regional channels. This number of 24 channels is as of July 2021. We have a sense because you have to get the channel watermarked, and broadcasters and networks do come to us for that. There are a couple more channels that we believe will get added in the kids space in the month of July/August itself. Next slide, please. So like we would have expected, the kids' viewership would have been over-indexed in terms of what they watch on their genre versus what the others would have watched on the kids' genre. We also have a component which we will cover going forward on what the co-viewing part is. It's interesting to note that a lot of kids do spend a considerable amount of time, and their hedge on certain genres like GEC and movies is equitable to the overall universe hedge. Next slide, please. In terms of kids' engagement, and we've seen how this continues to grow. The way it's a little busy slide, I'm apologetic about that. Most of our slides are very number heavy. So what we'll see over here is that the left-hand side of the quadrants, which are your universe numbers as against the 2 to 14, very clearly from last year, we've seen, I mean, most of us would have been homebound, and likewise for the kids, that the overall TV viewing did go up. Yeah, that went up to almost 4 hours and 3 minutes at a universe level, and kids also pretty much mirrored the entire piece. In 2021, up until now, we've seen how an average of 3 hours and 51 minutes, which was the universe viewing, and how kids has taken up that trend where they are now overhedged from the universe, and they are spending 3 hours and 52 minutes today. Next slide, please. Now, going back to that 1 hour, 23 minutes that we spoke about, how kids are spending this time daily on the kids genre, it's important to look at the engagement levels. We see today that the engagement levels of the urban kids, or kids based in the urban geographies, is higher than rural. An important point though over here is, if you look at the trend right from 2018 up to 2021, rural has really grown from 1 hour and 8 minutes that kids would normally end up spending average daily time to almost 1 hour and 19 minutes, and it's coming closer to the urban averages today. Next slide, please. As compared to total TV, kids viewership has always, so this slide essentially is looking at how the universe would view the 2 to 14 kids specific genre channels and how 2 to 14 are. So over here, the way to look at it would be to look at the lower quadrants, which is right at the end of each of these graphs, where we compare total TV as well as kids. We see distinctly that kids today have more skew towards male kids in 2 to 14, who are watching the kids genre more than the overall total TV and the other genres that are present in that. As against even the NCCS composition, if we were to look over here, the NCCS A composition is more skewed towards the kids genre. Similarly, between 2 to 8 and 9 to 14-year-old kids, we've seen how 2 to 8-year-old kids are more skewed, or are spending more time watching their kids genre. And as kids grow from 9 to 14, we've seen how they start looking at exploring other genres and other opportunities available on TV. Next slide, please. Contribution from rural India to the kids genre has increased. If you look at 2018, and if you look at the circled quadrant, which was 41% is what the rural part of India used to contribute to the overall kids genre viewership, that has moved up from 41 to almost 47% in 2021. Next slide, please. Now, we spoke about how 26% was the audience size, 21% was what they were contributing on total TV. This essentially is an understanding of how that 21% got broken up, where 14% goes towards the entire kids genre viewing, and 86% of that would be other genres. This is a phenomenon which we've seen over the years. It largely yet continues to be the same phenomenon, because 98% of Indian TV homes are yet single TV homes. So there's a lot of co-viewing that happens. In fact, this percentage of co-viewing, and can we move to the next slide, please? In fact, if we were to look at this co-viewing, which is the 86% that they co-view together or they watch other genres, we see almost 51% of that is skewed towards GECs. Now, this entire co-viewing piece, which is of 82%, now that essentially used to be almost close to 80%, almost a year back, that rose to 82 and came back now to 80%. Next slide, please. I did mention how, the preference, the choice of channels, the choice of genres changes between, we have a group which is, clubbed together as 2 to 14, which is what, makes up for the kids as per the NCCS classification. But if you were to bifurcate that between 2 to 8 and 9 to 14, we see very clearly over here that the entire GEC space hedge between these kids, 9 to 14-year-olds, have a higher hedge as compared to 2 to 18. Likewise, for the kids genre, particularly 2 to 8-year-olds are over-hedged on that as compared to the 9 to 14-year-olds. Next slide, please. So when we discussed about the overall genre, which contributes 7% to the total TV viewership, what is this 7% essentially? If we were to look at a share of duration versus a share of viewership, and if we were to index that and figure out what an ROI would be, some results of it obviously would be, as expected, where cartoons, stroke animation, and feature films, which contribute almost 90% of the entire FPC that all collectively, the kids channels put together would place. They have a ratio which is the best ROI ratio, where 1:2.86 versus 1:1.06 are for the first two subgenres of programming that the kids channels across their entire 24 channels would program. Next slide, please. So we discussed about 24 channels being part of 580, which is the entire BARC ecosystem. A very quick view over here, if we were to see in 2016 right up to 2019 and 2021, how the channels in 2016 were 19 and how today they stand at 24. It's important to note that the share of regional language feed in the kids channels has grown from 51% to 69%. We've also seen how the number of channels today who have multiple language feeds have grown manyfold. In the previous session, I heard the experts speak about how reach is important for them, how it's important for them to cater to the length and breadth of the country, and therefore, for obvious reasons, the language hedge has gone up. We've seen how Tamil, which had only 10 language feeds within the kids genre, today stands at 15. Telugu from 9 to 16, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So we spoke about how the regional hedge has moved up, how the number of channels with languages that were for the regional specific audiences has gone up. We've seen right from even 2020 to 2021, where that entire contribution from regional has moved up from 23% to around 28%. Half of the viewership, though, from most of those multiple language feeds comes largely from the Tamil language feed that caters to the entire kids genre. Next slide, please. Kids genre, important to note, it's not just viewed by the 2 to 14, and we got that quadrants of 26, 21, and 7%, and what kind of 14 to 86% are the other genres that the kids view. Similarly, a lot of kids channels are not just viewed by the 2 to 14-year-olds. We see almost 59% of those are viewed across different age groups, and that's when we spoke about co-viewing as well. Next slide, please. So this lends a unique opportunity, and we've seen a lot of brands do that. We've seen how creatives of certain commercials get played out, and specifically a lot of big advertisers looking at an opportunity, categories such as auto, finance, how they try and target all of these segments particularly. That's largely because of the quantum of co-viewing, which today stands at 82%. It was at almost 80, which today, sorry, apologies, stands at 80%, which was at an 82% first. So it hovers at around 80 to 82%, which is a sizable portion. Most kids which are watching TV today between the age group of 2 to 14 and are watching the kids genre, any one of those or many of those 24 channels, have a probability of 51% of the times co-viewing it with a female 31 years plus. Most likely could be their mother. Next slide, please. Even if we were to look at the ad volumes in this, and if we were to look at the ad volumes for the kids genre specifically, we've seen they're slightly under indexed, considering that the kids genre today actually gives, or rather contributes almost 7% of total TV viewing. The kids genre, unfortunately, today has a 3% hedge on the overall ad volumes that are placed on the kids genre across these years, and it's been pretty consistent. We hope that probably grows soon. Next slide, please. This is a trajectory which pretty much mirrored the overall ad volume also on Indian television last year, given the entire pandemic, where we have seen how the pre-COVID levels of the total ad volumes virtually got whitewashed in the first lockdown, which is a colored graph in between. And how we saw Q4 and Q1 really come back. Q4 was an all-time high for the kids genre. and 15 odd million seconds which were placed on the kids genre in a particular quarter was a never seen quarter before, right since inception. Quarter one was buoyant as well. The second lockdown did see some softness, not as much as the first lockdown. So we are hoping that the hit wouldn't have been as severe as last year in 2020. Next slide, please. What we see over here is that the number of advertisers also came back in Q1 of 2021 if we were to compare it to pre-COVID levels. The second lockdown phase did have a slight dip on that, but it yet continues to remain very buoyant as compared to the first lockdown period. Likewise for the brands as well, where you had a number of brands that actually were higher than what they were in pre-COVID who were present on the kids genre. Next slide, please. E-commerce that grew significantly across the TV landscape. Likewise, again, for the kids genre, the initial hedge was 5% to overall ad volumes that were placed in the kids genre in form of what e-com would. That almost doubled to 11% today. And what we see on the right-hand side of the chart is how subsections of e-commerce, and more expectedly the e-education, the OTT portions, and how online shopping contributed. Next slide, please. If we were to detail this, if we were to detail the segment which resonates the most and which would be the most likely one which would increase their hedge on the kids genre was the e-education component. The e-education component grew massively from a 0.82 million seconds to 2.39. It's almost like 200% growth. There were a lot of new e-education clients that came on board. They have been listed on the right hand side of the screen. It's not an exhaustive list. We've just named a few who were quite buoyant on the kids genre. Next slide, please. It's important to gauge what the impact of COVID would have been on a genre which kept which has had a very steady trend in terms of viewership all across. Extremely important to also understand what happened in terms of certain geographies or time bands. Did we spot any differences in this entire 1 year period with kids being homebound? Next slide, please. So in this, what's important to note that the hedge of kids, which is the 2 to 14-year-olds watching the kids genre, increased post-COVID. And likewise for the GC space. If we were to look at the lockdown period, the first lockdown period versus the second wave period, or even the pre-COVID versus the second wave, we very clearly see a hedge where the kids viewership has increased, not only on their genre, but even on the overall GC space. Next slide, please. It's important to note over here that Southern India, the skew was a little more towards the kids genre, and that's increasing, slowly but surely. Even if you look at a pre-COVID, which had a 32% of contribution from South, today that contribution on the kids genre stands at 38%. It's important to note that while HSM, which is the Hindi-speaking markets, would have a 60% urban contribution, urban kids watching, South has a 46% of urban contribution only. So that means in Southern India, there is more rural kid audiences which are aggregated now from pre-COVID up until now. Next slide, please. The free platform which used to have a 25% of its viewership coming from kids, which were 2 to 14, and this is across genres, not specific to the kids genre, that hedge now from 25% has gone up to 28%. Next slide, please. Post-COVID, the catchment area for kids in this particular quarter and over a period of time, our understanding is that it's now at from 12 noon until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, as against pre-COVID historic understanding where the pre-prime 1800 to 1900 hours would essentially be the catchment area where there would be heightened viewing. Given that kids are homebound, given that a lot of online classes would happen, and there is no fixed time as what they would be watching TV on. A trend has emerged in the last quarter where we have seen that there are more kids watching today, and that is between 12 noon until 1 o'clock. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, most kids again homebound, very little difference left between weekday and weekend viewing. How the delta on a weekend was a 12% delta in terms of viewership of the kids pre-COVID times, that over a period of time has got diminished, and now virtually your weekdays and weekends, they are absolutely at par. So that's another shift which probably the programmers across would have taken cognizance of. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and this is the summary. Important to note that kids today are an integral part of the overall TV viewing audience. Their audience size is 26%, which is the highest. We also look at how they contribute 21% to overall TV. We've seen how the hedge of rural has increased from 41% in 2018 to 47%, driven largely by South. Kids genre has been consistently growing, and we know that despite its growth, it's slightly under indexed when it comes to ad volumes. It stands at 3% versus 7% of viewership. With Kids Homebound, we saw how during the COVID and now in the latest quarter, we are obviously not yet off COVID. And we've seen how there has been some changes with reference to the genres, the time bands, and the geography. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Aditya ji, for sharing your invaluable insights.